As you know, the Russia-Ukraine war is not a proxy conflict, and there is no agenda to make Ukraine part of NATO, and there never has been. That's why we can reveal that it is propaganda and misinformation that the Russian Defense Minister said that effectively Ukraine is a de facto NATO nation already. Sorry, what? It was the Ukrainian Defense Minister that said that? Oh. Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Join me on a voyage to truth and freedom. Let us awaken together. Let's allow the suffering we feel individually and collectively to elevate us to new planes. Let their misinformation, their lies and their propaganda force us to be better, more truthful, more authentic, with more integrity. Let us use facts to build new narratives. Let's not get running away with the fairies, going all crazy, believing in conspiracies. We don't need to when there is so much truth available to us, like in today's story. If you're watching this on YouTube, please turn on the notification bell now and subscribe to our channel. It's the only way you'll get our excellent daily content, because the algorithm ultimately operates on behalf of the establishment. Of course it does. What else would guide it? So, listen, this is a fantastic story. We know that the mainstream media narrative is that Russia, in an unprovoked and barbaric attack, invaded Ukraine, and Western intervention is only humanitarian, and that all aid is simply in order to protect Ukrainian people. I'd like to believe that story as well. I'd like to live in a simpler world. We're told that this is not a proxy war, that American involvement is minimal and restricted to aid, that it's not about profiteering within the military-industrial complex, and that subsequent to the conflict, American and globalist interests won't benefit from the privatization of Ukraine. Well, I'm sorry, but information keeps coming out that makes it hard to believe that. What I will say is that Russia's invasion, and all war, is wrong, and that the suffering of the Ukrainian people should be utmost in all of our attention and minds, and anything that can be done to help them, short of causing a nuclear war, I might argue. I don't know, let me know in the comments or chat if you want to take this all the way to a nuclear war. That is something that should be done consciously, I think. You should go, actually, no, I'm willing to have a nuclear war, not just no one tells you that there could be a nuclear war, so you're just thinking, oh, we're just helping Lockheed Martin, Raytheon tell their shareholders that we're going to continue to profit. We are reneging on a promise not to make Ukraine a NATO country. Oh no, now there's a nuclear war. We are putting German tanks around Russia. Oh no, there's now going to be a nuclear war. All I want is for us to be informed. Of course, like you, I don't know how to resolve complex geopolitical issues that involve resources, deep history, post-Cold War politics. These are complex ideas. All I can do is tell you the facts as best as I understand them. Let's go. You might be wondering, is this a proxy war? Is this not a proxy war? Well, here in plain sight is Adam Schiff in Congress telling you what it is.
The United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here.
Aid Ukrainian people so we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia over here. That was probably still fueled by the idea that Russia were meddling in elections and stuff, which we now know simply was not true. So there you go. That's Democratic Representative Adam Schiff saying fight Russia over there. Sounds a little bit like a proxy war to me. In an interview with the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, aired Friday, Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov said that Ukraine is a member of NATO de facto. Okay, well that seems to be at odds with everything we've been told. Perhaps it's propaganda. There's so much misinformation about. Let's have a look.
Ukraine's defense minister says his country has become a de facto member of the NATO military alliance.
The origins of this conflict, do you know this already, as the mainstream media told you, was because when the Berlin Wall came down, a pledge was made between the United States and Russia, or the former Soviet Union, not to impinge on former Soviet territories by 1 inch, and not to make Ukraine and several other countries that are already NATO members. And Russia, whether Putin's mad or not, let's assume he is. It's irrelevant. Putin's mad. Great, fine. They did say that if you ever tried to make Ukraine a NATO member and imperialize it and privatize it, that would be cause for escalating hostility.
We have a lot of modern NATO standard weaponry. It means that Ukraine as country and the armed forces of Ukraine, or our sector of security and defense, became the member of NATO de facto, not de jure, but de facto, because we have weaponry, we have the understanding how to use it, we have this interoperability level of the communication with our partners.
Okay, so he's just described and explained how they are a de facto NATO member. No forms have been signed, but I imagine when Russia and the former Soviet Union sought assurances that Ukraine would not become a NATO member, the kind of things they meant is, we don't want them having weapons, communication systems, and the ability to attack us that would make them a de facto NATO member. Now, I am not a pro-Russia person. I'm certainly not a pro-war person, but what I am pro is pro-truth and pro being able to make decisions based on facts. And it seems there that the Ukrainian Defense Minister is saying that Ukraine are a de facto NATO member. That's going to escalate this conflict. But maybe they'll just be de facto members and leave it at that.
And I'm sure that in the next future we will become a member of NATO de jure.
Oh, so they're going to become actual members? Well, I don't think Putin's going to like that.
Well, that's a controversial statement. You're saying that Ukraine is de facto NATO member.
Why controversial? It's true.
That's just true.
It's true.
Shouldn't the mainstream media at that point have said, what? Hold on a minute. Everything we've been saying up to now is untrue and we've been doing the work of the establishment. And if it is a proxy war, hasn't everyone been saying, oh my God, nuclear Armageddon? Everyone, get out into the streets. The establishment is about to lead you into a nuclear war. Unless you want that, of course. If not, protest, unite, forget your cultural differences and come together against the military-industrial complex and this peculiar globalist cartel that are taking us into the jaws of death. Coming up on the weather also, you'll notice things are getting a bit hotter, but that don't matter anymore because you're going to die in about an hour.
It's true.
Rezhnikov's statement is an effective admission that the Ukrainian military has been functioning as a proxy of the NATO alliance, refuting false claims by the White House that the United States is not a party to this conflict.
Let me say it again. Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine.
Rezhnikov's assertion is indeed a fact and is only controversial because the United States government and media have been lying about this fact for close to a year, which is all we're saying on this channel, that you're not being told the truth and that we ought be. In May 2022, White House press spokesperson Jen Psaki was asked by a reporter, 8 in 10 Americans are expressing worries about a wider war and the possible use of nuclear weapons by Russia. So it's not a popular idea. Apparently, the majority of Americans don't want to die in a nuclear holocaust, which is, unpatriotic. And given that Russia has made it clear that they believe that NATO has engaged in a proxy war, what's the White House message to worried Americans right now? Psaki replied, I know that's the Russian talking point on this, but it's not a proxy war. It is a proxy war. We've just heard it. She added, this is a war between Russia and Ukraine. NATO is not involved. She added that it's important and vital for all of us not to repeat the Kremlin talking points on this front. So they're giving you an anti-propaganda stance that is in fact itself propaganda. Since Psaki made these claims, the United States has increased its involvement in the war by an order of magnitude. The United States spent more than $50 billion on the war last year and has pledged a further $50 billion in a bill signed by Biden in December. Following Psaki's declaration, the United States massively expanded its involvement in the Ukraine war, sending Ukraine the HIMARS long-range missile, the Patriot missile, and tracked infantry fighting vehicles. The United States played a central role in sinking the Moskva flagship in the Black Sea Fleet and in targeting Russian generals for assassination. And the United States has confirmed that Pentagon personnel are deployed in Ukraine overseeing the use of US-supplied weapons. That, along with Adam Schiff's declaration that they could fight Russia over there, seems to me like sufficient evidence to suggest that there is a proxy war. What do you think? And the reason I keep pointing this out is not to go, aha, I told you there's a proxy war, is because everyone's already agreed that a proxy war in America and Russia is a global conflict of an unprecedented scale that could lead to the end of our species. There won't be time for climate change. Don't worry about the bloody light bulbs and the solar panel stuff. We're going to be turned into ash where we sit. Another aspect of Rezhnikov's statement is significant. He said that Ukraine is a member of NATO, not because of actions taken by Russia in February 2022, but because Ukraine's military is interoperable with NATO standards. In fact, integrating the Ukrainian military with NATO has been a long-standing goal of the United States for years ahead of the invasion. In 2021, the US State Department fact sheet on US military aid to Ukraine proclaimed, Ukraine is a key regional strategic partner that has undertaken significant efforts to reform its military and increase its interoperability with NATO. Ukraine has undertaken significant efforts to reform and modernize its defense sector in line with NATO principles and standards. The United States and its allies have established a multinational joint commission and joint multinational training group to coordinate international efforts and help build Ukraine's defense capacity. So I can't imagine that they don't know that this proxy war, which obviously if I can work it out and you can work it out using this research, obviously Russia have worked it out, so it could lead to a nuclear war. Surely they know that that's a possibility. So that leads me to the terrifying idea that they know that and they don't care, because all along this was an attempt to drain Russia of its capacity to be an opponent on the global stage in order to create a unipolar world, i.e. a great reset where there is one government, ultimately a US government, and a set of corporate interests that don't face any meaningful opposition. I mean, of course, China remain, but you keep watching the news, baby. Reznikov's declaration comes ahead of an expected inflection point in US NATO involvement in the war. With the January 20 summit at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, a key US military base where Germany, Poland and other NATO members are expected to announce that they will send as many as 100 main battle tanks to Ukraine. There are indications that Russia is likewise significantly expanding the scope of its involvement in the war. So it's escalating. The conflict is getting worse. This is a serious geopolitical conflict which we're being sold reductively as a plucky David versus Goliath conflict where all we need to do is put up a sticker of the Ukrainian flag in our window and everything will be fine. It's okay to support Ukrainian people. It's necessary to support all suffering people everywhere, and particularly the Ukrainian people suffering in this conflict. They are worthy of support. They are worthy of refuge. They are worthy of love. But they oughtn't be used to mask the fact that profiteering and imperialist motives are at play here, which could affect all of our lives negatively. That's if you think a nuclear war is a negative thing. Let me know in the chat. In response to the proposed deployment of Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, they had to get rid of Leopard 1. It changed its spots. The retired Lieutenant General Andrei Gurylev, a deputy to the State Duma legislature, declared, "The appearance of German tanks on Russian territory is the cornerstone of any war." Nice. Nice burn. He continued, "Should we use nuclear weapons? Why should we be embarrassed if we're talking about our determination in the event of a threat to the territory of the Russian Federation?" Such statements testify to the extreme danger to all of humanity posed by the escalation of the war, which is rapidly spiraling out of control. To Russian people, German tanks, you might say, is a PTSD-style past trauma trigger point, because there was this couple of little old wars where Germany went the whole way across that country, slaughtering millions and millions of people under the banner of the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. This is not one of those references to Adolf Hitler that is contrived. This is a historic reference to an actual war in which we fought alongside the Soviet Union against actual Nazis. This war, we seem to be fighting alongside actual Nazis against Russia without anyone telling us that that's what's happening. Not suggesting all Ukrainians are Nazis, just that they are literally Nazi battalions within the Ukrainian forces. That's commonly understood. Commonly understood. Bit inconvenient. Just true. Look, I don't know a nuclear war either. I've got children. Hopefully what I just said is just propaganda. Maybe I've watched too much Russia Today, although it is banned on most platforms. In December, Democrat Representative Adam Smith, the head of the House Armed Services Committee, said that the growing calls for more oversight of the billions of dollars the US is spending on Ukraine are part of Russian propaganda. Ukraine is spending the money really well. That's why they're winning. Really well. That's patronising. Smith said at the Reagan National Defense Forum, according to Defense News. Defense. All these wars. We're just defending ourselves. Yes, we need oversight, but we don't need that as an excuse to not fund what we're doing. So anything that's at odds with the preferred mainstream media and establishment narrative is simply denounced as Russian propaganda. Do you remember anything else where anyone contradicting the mainstream narrative was denounced as a conspiracy theorist? And then do you remember how new evidence came out that perhaps some of this stuff was true? Now, the reason it's important to establish whether or not there's a proxy war is because everyone, even the United States establishment, admit that a proxy war could lead to World War III.
We will not fight a war against Russia in Ukraine. Direct confrontation between NATO and Russia is World War III. Something we must strive to prevent.
At least one thing we're all sure of is that the only reason that this war is happening is because 1, Putin is mad, and 2, Russia are bastards. That's the only reason. We can all agree that Russia's invasion is brutal and criminal, and that Russia haven't been provoked. At least we can agree that. This is Branko Markitic. Nearly a year in, the war in Ukraine has cost hundreds of thousands of lives and brought the world to the brink of, in President Joe Biden's own words, Armageddon. Armageddon. Alongside the literal battlefield has been a similarly bitter intellectual battle over the war's causes. Commentators have rushed to declare the long criticised policy of NATO expansion as irrelevant to the war's outbreak. Yet, a review of the public record and many dozens of diplomatic cables made publicly available via WikiLeaks shows that US officials were aware or were directly told over the span of years that expanding NATO was viewed by Russian officials well beyond Putin as a major threat and provocation, that expanding it to Ukraine was a particularly bright red line for Moscow, that it would inflame and empower hawkish nationalist parts of the Russian political spectrum, and that it could ultimately lead to war. And even conversationally, people that just watch the news remember that when Reagan and Gorbachev were talking about all this stuff way back in the 80s, it was understood that, hey, just let's chill, right, and we won't have a Cold War. It was sort of on the telly, where the telly used to be a little bit more honest. In a particularly prophetic set of warnings, US officials were told that pushing for Ukrainian membership in NATO would not only increase the chance of Russian meddling in the country, but risk destabilising the divided nation, and that US and other NATO officials pressured Ukrainian leaders to reshape this unfriendly public opinion in response. All of this was told to US officials in both public and private by not just senior Russian officials going all the way up to the presidency, but by NATO allies, various analysts and experts, liberals, Russian voices critical of Putin, even sometimes US diplomats themselves. So there's no shortage of information and no shortage of proof that this is what's happened and that it was understood explicitly to be a threat. This history is particularly relevant as US officials now test the red line China has drawn around Taiwan's independence, risking military escalation that will first and foremost be aimed at the island state. So there you are. Most ordinary Americans, most people around the world do not want to be engaged in foreign wars and massive political conflicts. We have to be coached to desire them, coached to think that it's in our best interests, or coached to think it's in the best interests of people that are vulnerable to tyranny elsewhere. What this escalation, what this denial of a proxy war, what this unwillingness of the media to report responsibly on the issue to me demonstrate is we have an independent set of elites that are in charge of the world and the stories that we are told about the world. For me, if Russia and China are truly a global threat to the freedoms of people that live outside of those regions, that's a story that needs to be told. And if we all ought be engaged in a global conflict to prevent Chinese or Russian tyranny respectively, that's something that I want plainly explained to me. Listen, Russia and China are going to team up and take over America and the rest of the world. You need us to defend you. But I somehow feel that whilst both of those nations are involved in regional disputes with the Ukraine, although we've just explained how that came about, and Taiwan, and I'm sure there's a story to be told there, it seems to me that there are advantages for the corporate state, for the governments themselves, for the military-industrial complex, all of which, let's face it, are so immersed. You hear about the revolving door. Well, it's spinning so fast now that it's just one orbit. It's just one solar system. They have interests we do not have. They have to tell us stories that make us interested in their interests, and they have to distract us from stories that awaken us to the reality. In this instance, we are playing a very high-stakes game, and one that I believe could seriously lead to the annihilation of our species. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe to our channel so that we can continue to tell you these complicated stories, hopefully in a way that you understand. Let me know what else you want to hear from us so that we can give you the content that you need, the content that you deserve. More important than any of that is that you please stay free.